But I can tell you that I am beyond grateful for it. Every single one of you is making all of this possible. So sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for being a part of my dream to teach the people of this world to love science and themselves. It means more to me than I can express. And if you want to become a patron as well, you can do so by using the link in the description of this video. The lowest tier is just $3, and that gets you access to the patron Discord, and it gets your name on the supporter wall both on my website and in many of the videos that I make. And with that, let's see what the Word of God has to say.
One of the worst cases of scientific falsification and delusion was Haeckel's evolutionary drawings of embryos. He fraudulently faked the similarities between human and animal embryos. After being exposed, this liar confessed to falsifying his embryo drawings. His caricatures were refuted by the scientific community.
Okay, so yeah, Haeckel's diagrams have been discarded. They're not used anymore. But that's not because he was some huckster who just came up with some ridiculous ideas about animal embryos and drew some crazy outlandish images and just tried to get them published and fooled everybody. It's because he drew those things in the late 1800s. Those are remarkably accurate, hand-drawn illustrations made shortly after the Civil War ended. So, like, for their time, they were pretty cool.
Begging for another
But
lesson
now,
so soon.
we have really nice scanning
remains
electron
much to be
microscope
done. Make it
images
quick.
that are way more accurate because they're basically photographs. So nothing's exaggerated. There's no opinions
So
put in there. Nobody's
you
trying to like,
had
really
Nepheli
indicate one
drink the
thing, so maybe it's a
potion?
little bit stretched or whatever. This is
Truly?
indicative of scientific literature at the time.
Perhaps some
Like for
things are
hundreds of
sweet.
years, science
It's
relied on hand-drawn
concocted from the
illustrations like
finest
this. And
ingredients,
sometimes that was
perhaps
really
I should
bad.
review the
And sometimes
recipe.
it worked out
I
just
may have
fine.
expected
But
too much
today,
at the
we have
beginning.
really good objective images,
Well,
many of which
well,
prove the
you're asking me
points
about
that
that,
people
are
like
you?
Haeckel were trying to
The
make.
task
Because
was
Haeckel
left to
wasn't the
you
only
and the
person
mongrel,
to
was it
draw
not?
illustrations like
Not
this. There were
only
a
are
lot
you
of them. So to the point of the
incompetent,
person in the
but
video
shameless
here,
to boot.
let's take a look at some
Well, there's
actual
no helping
modern
it.
images of
Now's
real
as good a time
embryos,
as
all at
any.
the same
I'll
stage of
let you
development,
in on it.
and you tell me
There's a
which
glintstone
one you
saucer
think
by
is
the
the
name
human.
of Selin
Pause the
in
video
the
here
engrave.
if you want to take a second to
She
guess,
owes
because I'm
me
going to
for
give
the
the answer
help I
in
gave
3,
her when she was
2,
expelled
1.
from
Did
the
you pick
academy.
this one?
I
You'd be
asked her
wrong.
to look
That's a
into the
chicken.
matter some
The
time
actual
ago.
human is over here.
I'll
And
write
if
you
you're
a
like
letter
me
of
and you're not going to be
introduction.
able to sleep tonight until
Go
you know
ask
the rest
her.
of the answers, here it is.
Human embryos do not have gill slits.
I am not going to make fun of the way they say gills. I thought about it, just poking fun at them, just a little bit, just lighthearted, you know, kind of just teasing. But I'm going to let this one slide, because on the first episode of Reacteria, I misspelled the words purport and evolution. It is my whole job to know at least one of those words. So we're going to let gills slide today.
They have pharyngeal sacs. It is unscientific to call them gills.
Okay, yeah, no, I see what they're trying to get at here. They're not super wrong, but they're not right either. What they're doing is they're taking two things that are very closely related, and they're conflating them, and then they're missing the whole context and list of definitions that goes along with those two things. So what you need to know is that when an embryo is developing, it has these little pouches that go down here. They're called pharyngeal pouches, and those will later become things like the ears and the jaw and a whole bunch of other structures around here. The clefts in between those pouches are what we call pharyngeal clefts or gill slits. Gill slits is sort of just like a colloquial term for this. And the reason for that is that those are what become gills in fish. And the reason we have them is because we evolved from fish. So they're leftovers. So the pharyngeal pouches that we have evolved from the pharyngeal pouches that fish have. They serve different functions now, but it's like the same stage of development. So it would be inaccurate to call this like the fish stage of embryonic development. That doesn't really track, but it does make sense to say that in the vast majority of the animals that have ever had pharyngeal pouches, they were very much related to gills. So like, it just, I get what they're trying to say, but they're missing a lot of context, and they're just not. I should also point out that humans are chordates, and if you ask most people what that means, a lot of the time they're going to tell you that it just means we have a spinal cord. This is the key to membership in the club that is the phylum Chordata. As long as you have a spinal cord, you're a chordate. And that's not true. In fact, there are actually 2 different qualifications to be in the phylum Chordata, and those 2 qualifications have a very special caveat. Here's how it works. To be a chordate, you need number 1, a notochord, any kind of a nerve cord that goes down your back, at any point in your development. There are actually some chordates that lose their notochord later on in their life, and they're still chordates. And number 2, to be a chordate, you need to have gill slits at any point in your development. And there are a lot of chordates, including us, that lose their gill slits later on in their development. For us, it's actually pretty early on, but whatever. So if you really want to sit here and split hairs and nitpick and say, oh, we can't call these gill slits, okay, you now need to make a totally new phylum, totally new taxonomy, totally new evolutionary tree, really just totally new phylogenetic tree. It just totally goes against the principle of parsimony. You have to make totally new groups with totally new rules just to accommodate this weirdly parochial worldview that you're keeping here. So like, sorry, it's literally part of the definition of what we are, is that we had gill slits at one time.
This scam with gill slits stimulates abortion. After all, if a human embryo is not yet a person, then it is not a pity to kill him.
Whoa! That's quite a leap. I thought I knew where they were going with this. I did not. I was very wrong. So many first of alls. Humans are animals. We are not plants. We're not fungi. We're not bacteria. We are animals. Specifically, we are great apes. That doesn't mean there's no shame in killing a human. Just because something's an animal doesn't mean that it's cool to kill it. What is that like? Also, like, I'm not going to get into my stance on the whole abortion debate because this is neither the time nor the place, but like, as a biologist, I can make a good, intelligent argument for life beginning at conception, for life beginning at the heartbeat, for life beginning at implantation, for life never really beginning at all because the sperm and the eggs are both alive and the zygote they produce is alive. So it's just a continuous stream. It never really has a start point. Or that you're never really truly alive until you're born, or at least like viable outside of the womb on your own. I can make so many arguments about these things. I can point out the fact that women miscarry all the time without even noticing. You have a fertilized egg, doesn't really work out, your body flushes it out, you never even tell the difference. Is that a miscarriage really, or is it not? Like, there's so many things here that you did not taken into account with that, but none of it matters because the whole abortion debate isn't about life or when life starts or what life is or what humanity is. None of that applies. The abortion debate is about one thing, and that is about rights, bodily autonomy. It's about what a person can do with their own body and what consequences those choices may or may not have on another body. That's the whole thing. This argument is insane, no matter what side you're on. This is the argument of a crazy person, and it does nobody any good. Holy crap.
Another one of the greatest archaeological fakes is the Piltdown Man, also known as Eoanthropos dawsoni. The Piltdown Man has been considered in 500 doctoral theses. Scientists receive titles and credibility because of these bones.
Yeah, but that's just how science works. Those people got the best information they had until that information was accredited. And then we all moved on. For a long time, doctors thought that different medical conditions were caused by an imbalance of humors. Humors are all the different fluids in your body. Your blood, your urine, your sweat, so on and so forth. And so, like, if you were sick, they would just be like, oh, you have too much blood. Your humors are out of balance. They would bleed you. A lot of people died from literally being bled to death by their doctor. Does this mean that medicine is a scam and nobody should go to the doctor anymore because some doctors got it wrong and like people actually got MDs learning about this insane science of humors? No, it means that was what we thought was true. We later found out it isn't true. People probably got advanced degrees proving that it wasn't true. And now here we are in a better world where nobody's having to worry about their humors anymore. Like, this is a silly argument. I'm sorry. You can't say, yeah, doctors were wrong back then. and then say the whole field is wrong now. That doesn't make any sense.
The evolutionist Samuel Werner considered pygmies to be monkeys who had not yet passed the stage of evolutionary development. He took a 23-year-old African pygmy, Otobanga, barbarously separated from his wife and children, and brought him in a cage like an animal to America for a world exhibition. Placed in the monkey house, the human Otobanga became a living exhibit of the missing link in evolution.
Wow. What a gross argument. What happened to Otobanga and others like him, because there were whole human zoos at one point, was atrocious and disgusting. It is beyond excuse. It is beyond justification. It should be excoriated and called out for the evil, hideous, monstrous nonsense that it was. It has nothing to do with evolution. Just because some people misinterpreted science and did something crappy, that doesn't change science. If 2 plus 2 is 4, we don't just throw out mathematics now. The whole reason we have a space program is because of Nazi rocket engineers, Nazi rocket scientists brought over here as project people. Is the whole reason we got there. So what? We bring down the ISS now because of what the Nazis did then? You're using the suffering of real beings to try to debunk evolution, which makes no sense, and to try to prop up your creationism. What a lazy and gross argument.
Lucy is another speculative reconstruction of the link between apes and humans.
Oh boy, it's Lucy again. I wonder what they're gonna say.
Biometric data showed that Australopithecus was not a humanoid creature.
No, it didn't.
Lucy's body parameters match the monkey's.
No, they don't.
Australopithecus translates as southern ape. Subscribe to the...
Really? That's your big zinger at the end there? That's what you're gonna end on, is that Australopithecus means southern ape. You're right. Australo means southern, Pithecus means ape. You got me. Call up, I think it was Raymond Dart who named that species. Tell him that he blew it for everybody. Because Australopithecus means southern ape, and that means it can't possibly be our ancestor. Names don't define things. If I call my couch a cat, it's still a couch, not a cat. I can't believe I'm having to explain this. Also, you do know that names can change, right? Like that's happened before. My research is in Homo erectus. That name means upright walking human. The original name for Homo erectus was Pithecanthropus erectus. Pithecus, again, meaning ape, anthro, referring to humankind. So Pithecanthropus erectus means upright walking ape man. Did it stop being an ape man and start being a human when we changed the name? Or was it always what it was? Would you believe in evolution all of a sudden if we changed the name of Australopithecus to something else? Homo? Whatever? Wow. What a bizarre note to end on. Overall, I'm going to give this one a science teacher challenge level 1 out of 10. It's really just bad arguments, very few of which even touch on evolution as a whole, and those arguments are oftentimes made in bad faith and have really, really gross connotations to them. So just awful, awful video. I don't know what the people in the comment section were smoking. Thanks God, says Arm Wrestling World. But we're not quite done yet, because there's one more video that I wanted to tackle this episode, and this one is going to be a rapid fire challenge. You remember John and Jane from a couple episodes ago, the whole debunking human evolution thing? That was a part of a big series, and that big series is on a DVD, and this is the promo for that DVD. So we're going to go through it just as fast as we can and see how many problems we can spot. Let's go.
I know that the last 2 weeks we've been talking about evolution. Really tough. Now, I don't mind if you had faith in God, but science doesn't require faith. It requires evidence.
Seems to me that that's what it is.
Good acting.
Life cannot come from non-life. But then in the next chapter it talks about how all life sprung from non-living material.
Abiogenesis is supported by a lot of evidence.
Then it talks about mutation and natural selection and how it can change one animal into another, but mutation only loses information.
That's not true.
So how does a simple living organism turn into something like us?
Evolution. That's called evolution.
I mean, you have to think about like the complexity of the human
You
eye.
are
How we
tarnished,
could never
aren't
design
you?
something like that.
I welcome
Pretty much
you
any
to
idiot
the
could design a
Church
better
of
eye than what we've got going
Vows.
on. In fact, a lot of
I am
animals
Muriel,
have better eyes than humans do.
steward of
Cephalopods don't
this
even have the
sacred
blind spots that we
chamber.
have.
Or
My
how
apologies for the
human body can
unseemly
heal
state
itself.
of
Healing is
affairs.
primarily the result of
Do
cell
you
division.
know the
We know how that
origin
works too.
of this place?
I just don't understand
How
how
it
some
came to be
half-pound
known as the
insect-eating
Church
shrew
of
that
Vows.
somehow
Well,
dodged
that is
whatever
a
killed the
shame.
dinosaurs could evolve
But
from
who can
ape
blame you?
to ape man over
The shattering
millions of
has
unseen
caused
years,
us,
and then poof,
all of
you have
us,
humans.
to
Well, that's 'cause
lose
the teacher
sight of
sucks.
something very
If
dear.
evolution were true, we'd
It
have
is
millions
here,
of
at the
in-between
Church
creatures
of
running around
Vows,
everywhere,
that
right?
the great
No, we see 'em in
houses
the
of
fossil
Earth
record. Why would they be
Tree
running
and the
around?
Moon were
And
joined
all of the
by the
in-between fossils
matrimonial
could fit in
bond
the back of my
between
Prius.
red-haired
No, they could. Well,
Radican
maybe they could. How big's your
and
Prius?
Renala
And
of
you know
the
what
full
else?
moon.
I just don't
And so our
understand
church holds
how
in
all of this
view
started.
the monuments
obvious. You should get a better
of
teacher.
houses.
I mean, you say that
The
science
Earth
doesn't
Tree
rely
of
on
the
faith,
capital
but evolution requires
and the Academy
faith.
of Rea
Faith that
Lucaria.
everything just burst out of nothing.
It sounds like you're talking about the Big Bang. The Big Bang has nothing to do with evolution.
That gas clouds collapsed and turned into stars, and
Oh,
all this
was there
stuff
some- you
just
are free to
collided
show
around the
yourself
sun to create
around.
planets,
I would
including
serve
Earth.
as your guide.
Okay, well now
only
you're talking
my
about
legs
astronomy and
aren't what they
astrophysics.
used
We
to
have
be.
evidence for that stuff too.
If you find
That is
anything
just the
of
right
use,
distance away from
unless
the sun
perhaps
to
you are in
sustain
search
life.
of
Oh,
instruction.
no. The
In which
habitable
case,
zone
I
is
will
like
share
almost 100
over
million
the
miles
map.
wide. The Earth could move around quite a bit and still be just fine. And also, if it wasn't in the habitable zone, you wouldn't know because we wouldn't be here. So, like, you did evolve on this planet because this planet was right for us to evolve on, not the other way around. The planet isn't right for us, we're right for it. You're putting the cart before the horse. Don't do that.
It requires faith to believe that living organisms created male and female.
Not all animals are dioecious, so they don't all have two sexes. Also, why'd you throw the word created in there like that?
I just think it takes a lot more faith to believe in
Oh,
evolution
what have we
than it
here?
does to believe
Very well,
that
let us
all the
heresy is not
design,
native to the
marvelous
world.
design
All
around us went
things
to a
can be
designer.
What
conjoined.
marvelous design? Do you mean the marvelous design of having the breathing tube and the eating tube right next to each other?
Do
Because
you
I'm pretty sure
possess
like any
celestial
intelligent
I would
person
like
wouldn't
to
make that
share
mistake.
my knowledge
And
with you
now I'm
concerning
just
the
rambling, so does
miracle
anyone
of
else
this
have a
Radican
question?
once cleansed himself with celestial dew.
Be prepared to
Repented
give
his
an answer
territorial
with the new
aggressions
DVD
and
Debunking
swore his
Evolution,
love
what every
to
Christian
Renala,
student should
the
know.
order of the Earth Tree,
Oh man,
and
that's
the fate
bad.
of the moon
And with
were
that,
conjoined.
I'm Forrest Valkai.
And
Thank you
all
so
the
much
wound
for
this
watching, for
miracle
liking, for
blesses the
commenting, for
church
subscribing,
to
and all
this
the other
day.
stuff that you
And
do here on
so
YouTube.
you need
Please
only
exit through the gift
follow
shop on your way
Radican's
out. And
example
while you're
to
down there in the links in the
restore any
description,
bond,
check out my
however
podcast and my
strained or
Patreon.
severed,
Have an awesome
to its
rest of your day.
rightful state
And never
of
stop learning.
harmony.
Bye-bye. Hey, Editing Forrest here. Really quick before the video starts, my air conditioner has been on the fritz all year long, and I thought I had it fixed, and it broke again right before I started filming this video. And I just figured I'd power through it. It was nighttime, so it couldn't have been too hot. I live in Oklahoma, and that was a false assumption. So as this video progresses, you're just gonna see me getting sweatier and shinier and grosser and more agitated.
To
So,
experience the
sorry,
miracle,
I thought about
absolution will be
refilming this,
yours.
but I figured it would be weird to go back and try to react
My
to
faith
everything.
does
So
the
this is
miracle
what the video
rooted
is.
in this.
I hope
If
you
you
enjoy
would
it.
be,
Sorry,
I
look so
hope that
gross.
you too.
Bye! Hey there, everybody. I'm Forrest, and welcome back to Reacteria. While preparing for this episode, I thought it would be fun to get away from just talking about evolution for a minute and maybe expand into some other sciences. Maybe we could find a funny anti-vax video or a ridiculous flat earth video to react to. And while I was digging around YouTube looking for these anti-science videos, I came across a familiar name. Genesis Apologetics. And wouldn't you know it, our old friends, John and Jane. They tried to debunk evolution with their creepy trunk full of skulls, and now they're back trying to debunk radiometric dating. I am beyond excited to get started on this video because radiometric dating is a really interesting and important part of science that's only a bone of contention with people who don't understand how it works. And last time we heard from John and Jane, if I remember correctly, they got a 4 out of 10 on the Science Teacher Challenge level scale, which is like the highest that we've had because they raised really good questions for like a high school, maybe early college student, which I'm pretty sure is their target audience. So maybe they'll raise good questions here. Maybe we'll actually have a good discussion. Maybe we'll all learn something. Who knows? I'm stoked to get into it. But before I do, I want to thank my patrons on Patreon. I don't even know if I can fit all of these names onto the screen at the same time. I think I might need to do them in back. batches, like maybe one big chunk of names, and then after a few seconds, another big chunk of names, because so many of you have signed up to voluntarily donate your own hard-earned money just to help me teach the world to love science as much as I do. And I cannot express how grateful I am for that. Like seriously, I don't have words for that level of generosity. None of this would be possible without the people who watch these videos, the people who donate to my Patreon, the people who buy merch from my merch store, the people who send me tips through Cash App and Venmo and PayPal. Like, all of you are so incredibly helpful, I can't even tell you. So sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for being a part of my dream to teach the world to love science and themselves. I love you very much. You're all very special to me. And while I haven't actually seen most of your faces, I'm sure that you all have very kind eyes. Seriously though, if we get many more patrons, we're gonna have to figure something out. Like maybe like a credits roll at the end of the video or something like that. I'll have to see what other YouTubers do, because I want to try to get you all in here as often as possible, because I'm so happy about all of you being here. Enough about that. Let's get started with John and Jane debunking radiometric dating.
Is it just me, or is dating rocks not all it's cracked up to be?
Are all their videos gonna start like this?
Sorry, I am late, Jane.
No problem. Oh, you've been jogging?
Yeah, I'm trying to get down to weight for the wrestling match this weekend. Otherwise, I'll get kicked up to the next weight division and have to face Jimmy the Python Ferretti.
Jimmy the Python?
Yeah, he got his nickname after the kid so hard that he was crawling in class for 3 days.
Man, don't drink the water! You'll let water weight.
That's a bad message. Drink water, especially if you've been exercising. Please drink water.
Oh no,
What's wrong?
245. 245. Do you know what that means? Here it comes.
I'm sorry, John. Hey, you know, maybe if you just grease yourself down, you'll just...
Hey, stop! We're working on radiometric dating, right?
I've noticed this is one of the most heated battles this whole dating.
Well, that's because time is at the foundation for everything evolutionary humans teaches.
It's always cool when you can just smell the argument they're about to make.
Geologists now use radioactivity to establish the age of certain rocks and fossils. This kind of data could have shown that the Earth is young.
If that had happened, Darwin's ideas would have been refuted and abandoned. Instead, radioactive dating indicates the Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. Plenty of time for evolution and natural selection to take place.
Wow.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
Wow, it seems that the foundation of evolutionary theory sure depends on radiometric dating. Radiometric dating is used to support the belief that millions of years exist for evolution to happen.
Before we go any further, I just want to take a second to point out that radiometric dating is super important, but it is not the only way that we can know the age of something that we find down in the ground. For example, there are relative dating methods, like biostratigraphic dating, for example, where we can see like this one artifact is in this particular layer of strata. I can't test the artifact itself maybe, but I can check all the other stuff in that layer of strata and figure out how old that is, and now I know this is in the same layer, so it must be the same age. So again, this is called relative dating, because we're dating this one thing relative to the stuff around it. We also have absolute dating methods. That's what radiometric dating is. It's an absolute method, because we're actually testing the thing itself and finding out the absolute measurement of the absolute age of this thing. And there are a lot of those too. Fission track dating, thermoluminescent dating, paleomagnetic dating is really good. So like, I know this video is just about radiometric dating, so I'm not going to fault them for not bringing up these other things. I just want to throw this out there, so in case for some reason you have some contention with how radiometric dating works, you should know it's not the only trick in the book.
And like they said, the entire age of the Earth rests upon radiometric dating. It sure seems that they're putting a lot of faith in something that they can't actually test through direct observation. After all, plenty of assumptions go into these calculations.
There are no assumptions, and we can directly observe this stuff. I mean, what do you think nuclear chemists do all day?
If it were to be disproved, their whole worldview would seem to collapse.
If you were somehow able to debunk radiometric dating and show that it was all some big scam, that would certainly throw a monkey wrench in our view of how the universe works. But it wouldn't do anything to disprove evolution or the age of the Earth. Like, the Earth is still very clearly way more than 6,000 years old. And evolution is still something that we can directly see right before our very eyes, both in the fossil record and in laboratory experiments. So like, we still know how mutation works, we still know how natural selection works, we still know how erosion and weathering works, we still know how strata are deposited one layer after the other, the whole law of superpositioning and all that, we still get that. So like, even if you were to get rid of radiometric dating, that's a problem, but we still understood evolution pretty well before we had it. So like, all it does is just add one more line of evidence. And that's the cool thing about really established science like this, is that it's not an island all on its own. It's supported by several different lines of evidence. Radiometric dating is one of them, but I would even argue it's not even the most important.
Pretty epic, eh?
Shut up, John.
Actually, the age of the Earth is based on the dating of certain meteorites. They assume these meteorites formed at the same time as the Earth, and that dating the meteorites will give us the Earth. Cookie, I'm not gonna be...
Thanks. Well, so they don't even use rocks from Earth. If there's another assumption, you don't hear about that.
We can't use rocks from Earth to tell how old the Earth is because of plate tectonics. The crust of the Earth is constantly being recycled, being sucked down into the mantle, boiled, and then pooped back out onto the crust again through volcanic activity. So like, there are very, very few places on the crust, maybe like the very cores of continental plates, for example, where we can really kind of get a grasp of just how old this place is. Fortunately, meteors and stuff out in space would have formed about the same time that the Earth did, and those don't have any tectonic activity. So we can go test those rocks, and they'll tell us how old the whole solar system is, not just the Earth. Now, granted, these aren't Earth rocks, so there is a little bit of a margin of error in there. And that margin of error is around 50 million years, which sounds really big, but remember, that's 50 million years out of 4.6 billion years. So really, that's around a 1% difference. So we're pretty darn close.
Wow, this thing's still half frozen.
Now, pretend the water bottle is a rock. Rocks contain radioactive material called the parent element, or isotope, which decays into a non-radioactive stable product known as daughter element, or isotope.
Okay, I remember now. So, it's like the ice that slowly melts into the water.
Yeah.
That's actually not a bad analogy. I am totally stealing that next time I teach this.
Oh, when they discover a rock, they can measure the amount of parent material, the daughter product, and using a chart like this, determine how old it is.
So, what's wrong with this method?
Well, the methods measure only the amounts of isotopes in the rock. This is good science because it is observable and repeatable. It just gives the ratio of one element to another. But the age is an interpretation of those measurements, not an observation. And that interpretation assumes answers to all kinds of untested questions. What if the rock already had a daughter isotope in it from the very beginning?
Where would that have possibly come from? These things have a set rate of decay. And even if there was some sort of weird contaminant in there, we usually take several samples from the same source material. So they're all gonna line up. If one of them doesn't, that tells us that there's a problem and we would go back and correct for it. The type of contaminants that would throw off a measurement like this are not the type of thing that your average geologist would just have on their body to accidentally spill on this rock, so that's probably not an issue.
Or what if the rate of decay was rattled at some point in the past?
Well, that just makes no sense. Unless the laws of physics were rattled, the rate of decay is going to remain constant.
What was the original ratio of parent to daughter isotope?
We can know that because we know what the current ratio is and we know what the rate of decay is. This isn't magic, it's just algebra. If you have two parts of a three-part equation, you can figure out the third part.
One must assume no parent or daughter material was added or removed from the rock, and that the rate of decay has always been constant over millions and millions of years.
Again, unless the laws of physics were different at some point in history, or there was some dude just seamlessly injecting unstable isotopes into various rocks, this isn't a real concern.
But the most convincing evidence is all the crazy dates they get with radioisotope methods. I wonder if our teacher even knows all the assumptions behind radiometric dating. To be fair, there are lots of dates that agree with one another, but there are many...
That was such a weird interjection. I feel like that was a clip that was supposed to be way earlier on. I wonder if Jimmy the Python's on Instagram, and they just accidentally put it right there, and then just nobody was paying attention, so they just left it in there. I should point out here that there are a lot of elements that we can use as radiometric clocks. It's not just radiocarbon, which is the big one that everyone freaks out about all the time. There's carbon, there's potassium, there's argon, there's lead, there's uranium, and the cool thing about this is that their rates of decay, the ranges at which they cover, all overlap with each other. So like you would have two different isotopes that cover the same time period, and you would test for both of them, and you better get the same answer with both tests, otherwise you know something is wrong. So again, this isn't guesswork. There are no assumptions here. There are ways to check and double check our work, and any good scientist would do those checks.
But there are many examples of different mineral components of a rock giving very different radiometric dates, and very often different isotope systems give different ages for the same rock. So how can you know which one is the right age, if any?
So this part just simply isn't true. The only time that we're going to get wildly different dates from the same rock is when creationists try their hand at radiometric dating, do it wrong, get crazy results, and then try to publish those crazy results as proof that radiometric dating doesn't work in the first place. And that happens a lot.
And then there are rocks we know the age of, where we've watched it cool from lava, that give radically older dates.
Really?
Yeah. A lava flow in a volcano of the North Island of New Zealand that happened in 1954 was dated to be 3.5 million years old.
Okay, so that's an interesting citation. That could actually be a problem for us. Let's look that up. Excess argon is the Achilles heel, potassium, argon. The study was published by the Institute of Creation Research.
Would you donate
The only time that we're going to get wildly different dates from the same rock is when creationists try their hand at radiometric dating, do it wrong, get crazy results, and then try to publish those crazy results.
You're not like the others who give
This
me
rock
credit,
was taken
sorry.
from the Ono Formation
They
near
rest their
Redding,
trembling
California,
hands
where
upon me.
millions of sea fossils have been
Howling
found.
wordlessly, they
This
gently
lower
stroke my
Cretaceous
eyes.
rock is supposed to be
Their
about
frail
112
fingers,
million years old.
emaciated.
But the marine fossils
still,
stuck inside the mud rock,
they give me the
an
grapes.
ammonite,
But
showed
you,
36,000 radiocarbon years.
somehow
How can a rock
firmer.
be 112 million years old if it holds a fossil of only 36,000 years using a different method?
Radiocarbon ages for fossil ammonites. It was published by Answers in Genesis.
Let me see your diamond ring.
You mean my purity ring?
John must be crushed.
Hey, at the jewelry store, the sign said diamonds take billions of years to form deep beneath the earth.
I doubt that. Researchers find carbon-14 in diamonds.
Why is that important?
Radiocarbon decays quickly. It has a half-life of only about 5,730 years. So its maximum shelf life is only about 100,000 years before it becomes undetectable. And it might be impossible to contaminate an old diamond with young carbon.
Wow, so those diamonds must be younger than they think.
I just Googled, can you find carbon-14 in diamond? And the results are all Answers in Genesis, Institute of Creation Research, ScienceAgainstEvolution.org, Creation.com. Guys, you gotta stop this. Learn how peer review works.
So here's the real question. Why are any of these examples in our textbook?
Because it's a science textbook, and what you're talking about isn't real science.
But back to the original quote we read in the book. If they're wrong about dating rocks, then the entire evolutionary theory crumbles to pieces.
That's true. None of us were there to verify the assumption.
But God has provided a written account of history. And if you tally up all the chronologies and time cues in the Bible, the Earth is about 6,000 years old.
The chronologies that you find in the Bible are largely based upon the life stories and genealogies of people who supposedly lived to be hundreds and hundreds of years old. Noah, for example, was 600 years old when the flood happened, wiping out all life on Earth aside from him, his immediate family, and all the animals that he could fit on this little boat. So putting that into perspective, he then would have had enough children and enough children with his own children to populate all of Egypt and all of Egypt's Hebrew slaves, because the next book is Exodus, plus all the people in North and South America and Australia and Indonesia and South Africa and East Asia and Europe that the Bible just fails to mention. All of that within about 300 years, because he died at the ripe old age of 950. So he was a busy dude. Is that really where we're taking our cues from? Hey there, editing Forrest again with a really quick interjection, because this part kind of bugged me when I went back and rewatched it, because although parent-child incest is pretty common in the Bible, especially the Old Testament, to realize this is the only possible explanation. So I looked it up, and I found that Noah had his sons with him on the ark. So that's 4 total families that had to repopulate the whole world. There were 8 generations between Noah and Moses, and the time span there was about 850 years. I also looked up the U.S. Census Bureau as a historical estimate for the world population at the time of the building of the pyramids, and they have that at about 10 million people. So we've got 4 families over 8 generations producing 10 million people in 850 years. So the exponential growth formula there would be 4 times x to the power of 8 equals 10 million. You divide out the 4 and you get x to the power of 8 is 2,500,000, and the 8th root of 2,500,000 is 6.3. So what we could be talking about here is every single human being on the planet having on average 6 children, and their children having 6 children, and their children having 6 children. No kids ever get to die. If you forget to do your job, then the next person in line, your neighbor, has to have 12 kids over and over consistently for 850 years. That would produce all the people in the world, who would then spread out from there and populate all these other continents and make all these other civilizations that the Bible decided wasn't important. So just watch for the creationists who come into the comment section and say, aha, see, it is mathematically possible. Yeah, it's mathematically possible. It still makes no freaking sense.
It's like it says in Job 38:4. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. It's like God saying, you weren't there.
The book of Job also talks about unicorns. Just throwing that out there.
Kind of makes you think, doesn't it?
Nope, it sure doesn't. I've read the source material and it is not thought-provoking. Well, this was a fun one. Overall, I give this one a science teacher challenge level 4 out of 10, which I'm pretty sure is the same thing that they got last time, because you actually have to know how to read more than just the title of a scientific paper, which is something that not a lot of people know how to do. There are a lot of other videos on this playlist. Natural selection, vestigial structures, common ancestors, fossils, whale evolution, we could do a lot of these. I don't want to pick on John and Jane too much, but if they're gonna keep putting out hilarious videos like this, it's only fair that we keep talking about them and maybe learning some real science along the way. So let me know in the comments below if you want to see more from this series. Thank you so much for watching, for liking, for commenting, for subscribing, and all the other stuff that you do here on YouTube. Please exit through the gift shop on your way out. Pick up one of these sweet t-shirts. If you like terrible podcasts, I've got one of those linked down below. I hope you have an awesome rest of your day. Watch out for Jimmy the Python and never stop learning. Bye-bye.
Hello? Should we delectably tend? What a sight they must be to behold. No.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I've waited so long to say this again.
Noises
Welcome back to Reacteria.
Sorry.
I know it's been a long time since we've seen each other, but I've got really good
Don't mind
news.
me.
First and foremost being, I'm talking to you with an
I apologize.
actual camera now.
You only did as I
Secondly,
asked.
I've got
be
professional
fine.
editing software
Think no
now,
more
which
of it.
means there won't be any weird audio sync issues anymore. No more little clips where the audio just doesn't exist for some reason. And, possibly most exciting, I'm so happy to tell you that this episode is sponsored by NordVPN. Really, genuinely, I just want to tell you that I do use NordVPN. I think it's an awesome service. I've never had any problems with them. My favorite way to use them is I like to watch things like Rick and Morty, which you can't get on Netflix in America, so I just connect to Australia, and then I can watch every single episode, even the newest season. That's really, really cool for me. And Nord is offering a special promotion for my subscribers. It's a massive discount on a 2-year plan, plus 1 additional month free. And all you have to do to get it is go to nordvpn.com/ValkyLabs. Now, I went to that URL before I told you about it because I wanted to make sure what they were offering you, and it looks like they're giving you guys 73% off that 2-year plan. That comes up to a little bit more than $3 a month, plus the additional 1 month free. So in total, you're getting 25 months of service for $79. That's legitimately an awesome deal. And it's actually cheaper than their 1-year plan right now. So if you're interested in a VPN, this is an awesome time to get one, and it really does support the channel. Again, that's nordvpn.com/ValkyLabs. And with that, let's get into the video because I feel like it's gonna be a good one.
Kevin, it seems what you're describing here is that there is a large part of the scientific community that is in kind of a desperate attempt here to preserve age. Why is that?
Time is the critical component for evolution. If you're going to say that a simple cellular system became a multicellular system that then became fish, and the fish then jumped up on land and grew legs and started breathing air, and then that creature grew feathers and wings and started flying. So if you give us time, we'll claim to account for all of this massive change of organisms. But we got to have the time.
Time is a critical factor in our understanding of evolution. Like I said in the last video about radiometric dating, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that the Earth has been here for a really long time. That's why the fossil record makes sense. We see layer after layer of plants and animals gradually changing in form over time. Yes, from simple to complex, eventually ending up in the complex form that we have today. But even if you were to take away our understanding of the age of the Earth, even if you were to prove somehow that the Earth was 6,000, maybe 10,000 years old, it would certainly blow our minds. But we still have several other lines of evidence showing us how evolution works. So you wouldn't disprove evolution, you just show that it happens insanely fast.
If you pull out the notion of a long period of time, you're pulling out a major foundation for the conventional paradigm.
Absolutely. Evolution, specifically neo-Darwinism, requires a lot of time. And it's their foundational issue. You pull that out, they've got to come up with a whole new understanding because without time, they don't have anything.
Again, that's just not true. Time does have massive explanatory power, yes, but this guy specifically mentioned neo-Darwinism, which is the blending of Darwin's ideas with Mendel's ideas. Mendel was the guy with the pea plants that helped us figure out genetics. Darwin and Mendel never knew each other. They published their work around the same time. They never read each other's work. So Darwin didn't know anything about genetics, and Mendel didn't know anything about natural selection. But when you put these two ideas together, they help explain each other really well. And Mendel's laws of genetics really help us understand how accumulated phenotypic changes can cause macroevolution, which was Darwin's ideas. So that's what he's talking about. But even that model is severely lacking as well. For example, it leaves out things like epigenetics, which are changes not to the genome itself, but to the way in which the genome is expressed. It leaves out things like the microbiome. Like, we have massive amounts of evidence that show that someone's gut biome has at least as much, if not sometimes even more control over things like their body fat content and their metabolism and their overall health than their genetics do. So that kind of has this weird neo-Lamarckian twist to it. Lamarck was the guy that thought that heritable traits were something that were accumulated within an individual's lifetime. So like, if you were to cut the tail off of a rat, all of that rat's babies then would be born without tails. Lamarck was wrong, but it turns out that he was kinda almost right. because things like epigenetic changes and microbiotic changes are things that can happen within an individual's lifetime and can be passed on to their offspring, which can affect their evolutionary trajectory. And even that super duper blended view of evolution still leaves out things like phenotypic plasticity. And that's a huge factor to survival as well. So like, if you're gonna throw out neo-Darwinism here as the thing that you're trying to disprove, you have to realize that there's a lot more there that you're just kind of ignoring. And if the only thing that you're bringing to the table here is saying that you're gonna disprove deep time to do this, my dude, you are bringing a toothpick to an atom bomb fight.
The mechanism claimed to drive evolution is mutation, where we'll define mutation as a change in the nucleotide sequence of DNA. So the driving mechanism claimed for evolution is a mutation, and then natural selection looks and sees what effect that mutation had.
May the blessing
And
of
if it likes it, and this is giving, of course, a lot of power to natural selection it doesn't have, but if natural selection likes it, see, then that organism survives. If it doesn't like it, then that organism dies off. And then you do the next step, and you keep repeating that step over and over again.
I mean, he's doing a phenomenal job of explaining neo-Darwinism. This is a great way to introduce this concept to like maybe an undergrad class, even like high schoolers. This could be like the total understanding of evolution that they need to get a good handle on how this works. Now, why do I get the feeling that he's about to completely just crap the bed in the next sentence?
The idea being that somehow in that process, the fish who only breathes oxygen through water, who doesn't have legs, whose vision is based upon seeing through water, not seeing through air, somehow plops up on land and through these very slow processes transforms its entire anatomy and physiology where it can breathe air, it can walk on land, and it can see in air.
And there it is. It's not somehow. We know the process. Fish today who live in low oxygen environments will occasionally come up to the surface and gulp air to get the oxygen that they need. It's not crazy to see how that kind of thing might be so beneficial that over time it happens more and more regularly. Here's a fun fact for you. Lungs evolved before swim bladders did. Swim bladders are actually modified lungs. So lungs came into existence, and then some fish kept the lungs and used them to become better fish. How cool is that? We have fossils of Sarcopterygian fish with shoulder girdles and big thick wrist and hand bones that were in the transition to becoming amphibians. And as far as the whole concept of it just being inconceivable that a fish could learn how to like see and breathe on land, might I remind you that lungfish exist. There's a whole clade of them, dipnoi, I believe. That is a whole bunch of fish that stayed in that weird in-between niche that was opened up by this transition that you think is somehow illogical. So like, there's living proof today that what you're saying here is nonsense.
And so they see it as you give me enough time, we can account for all this. See, now it really doesn't, but time becomes one of those things to a human. You know, yeah, it's almost like anything can happen given enough time.
Mine gets fuzzy when you...
Yes, and they hide behind that fuzziness. It just took a long time. Somehow that becomes the magic wand, you know. A long time, poof, there it is. Forget the idea that there's no biological mechanism that accomplishes that. Time, poof, we got it.
What do you mean no biological mechanisms? There are plenty of biological mechanisms. You just got done explaining a couple of the biological mechanisms. What are you talking about?
Darwin wrote his original ideas in a time where there was very little known about the cell and even less known about genetics. Now, Gregor Mendel, who's kind of considered the father of genetics, he did the pea plant studies and all that, he and Darwin were peers. And there was even found in Darwin's library an unopened copy of Mendel's paper. But it's questionable even if Darwin would have opened it, if he would have understood it, because, and that's not putting Darwin down, that's just a matter of most people in that time didn't understand Mendel's studies. They just simply didn't understand it. And so Darwin proposed these ideas, and they became very popular at a time where genetics and even cellular biochemistry was not well understood. So in essence, there was this big vacuum of lack of knowledge that they were able to quickly step into, and we could just pretend that it all made sense, because maybe, maybe not, we just simply didn't know.
I mean, I'm glad to hear that you understand that Darwin and Mendel were contemporaries, but the conclusion that you're drawing from that evolution is some ridiculous hypothesis that was just thrown out with no real evidence, that makes no sense. Darwin didn't know anything about genetics. Mendel didn't know anything about natural selection. But if you notice, On the Origin of Species isn't a college textbook. We mention Darwin because he was the first one to really publish this idea of natural selection, but we don't worship Darwin. He was wrong about a lot of things, and so we've moved on. And Darwin's ideas, mixed with Mendel's ideas that you just explained, combined to make a new theory called Neo-Darwinism, which you just explained. Like, did you think that your audience just wouldn't notice that you just said one thing and then said the exact opposite? Or are you just kind of banking on the idea that nobody knows what these words mean?
You could not, and this is a challenge I put out over and over again, you could not today present Darwinism and it be accepted, because we would know better. But because it's already accepted, then, well, it must work somehow.
Yeah. If On the Origin of Species was published today, it would absolutely be rejected. Why? Because it's a book from the 1800s. It doesn't have access to all the data that we've collected in almost 200 years since it was published. So yes, it would be thrown out. Fortunately, Darwinism doesn't mean only and exactly what Darwin said. If the theory of evolution as we presently understand it was presented today, it would be massively celebrated because, as the geneticist Theodosius Dovsansky said, nothing in biology makes sense except in light of evolution. Like, I'm starting to think that you're not just being willfully dishonest here. I'm starting to think that you actually don't know how this stuff works.
Several years ago, I listened to a Nobel laureate give a talk, and in that talk, he described cellular systems as Rube Goldbergs. You know what that is, where it'd be all hobbled together. And he was a Nobel laureate trying to claim that because of evolution just hobbles things together, whatever works. So the cellular systems are all hobbled together. So he called them Rube Goldbergs. And even at that time, I thought that's a very, very foolish thing, especially in absence of not knowing. But what we already knew, I felt challenged what he said. I would defy him to say that today in the face of what we know about cellular systems today. They're not Rube Goldbergs. They are enormously sophisticated where we still don't understand. It's still beyond that. And the DNA is a classic example. The Human Genome Project, the irony is that instead of the Human Genome Project destroying the foundations of biblical creation, all that, it has been one of the biggest booms, one of the greatest things for creation to ever happen. Because among other things, what it has shown is it has shown that in each cell in your body that has chromosomes, there is a system going on there that we don't yet have more than the very minor understanding of.
Good gravy. What a weird amalgamation of the God of the Gaps argument and the fine-tuning argument. You don't know how the body works? Yes, we do. You don't know how cells work? Yes, we do. Well, you don't know how the genome works? Yes, we do. Well, you don't know every little bit of it. And even if you did, it's all so complex that clearly must be controlled by something. Like, can you imagine how silly it would be if a meteorologist made these exact claims? Because they used to. You don't know how lightning works. Yeah, actually, it's just electricity. Well, you don't know what controls the electricity. It's ions, actually. Well, you don't know what makes the ions work. And even if you did, it's all so intricate and perfect that clearly it must be a god. It's just you're making this god an ever-shrinking pocket of ignorance. Until finally you have nowhere left to hide, so it just explodes and now it's everything again. Just boring and lazy, dude.
And I'll get people to write me, what about this and what about that? Well, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't understand mutations. I spent 20 years studying mutations.
Let's take a look at some of Dr. Anderson's work over his 20 years of studying mutations. All right, so I just went to Google Scholar and looked up Kevin Anderson. It's kind of a mess, but I did check out his creation wiki page, found out that his middle initial is L. So I've got here Kevin L. Anderson Evolution typed into Google Scholar. And here's 2 papers right away. The first one is published by the Proceedings of the International Conference on Creationism. That's at least a published paper. It's published through Cedarville University. Let's look that up. It's a private Christian university. The other one here is published in the Creation Research Society Quarterly. So that's definitely not peer-reviewed, but let's double check. So this is a search engine of scientific journals out of Stony Brook University. It's a great way to see if a journal is actually legitimate. So I'm just gonna look up the Creation Research Society. Yeah, big surprise, there's nothing there. Looking back at this paper, here at the bottom it says that Kevin works at the Van Andel Creation Research Center. So he's not working among peers in his field. He's working in a place that values ideas like his. Let's look. So back here on the Creation Wiki page, it says that he got his PhD from Kansas State, that he taught at Mississippi State, and that he is actually the director of the Van Andel Creation Research Society, and that he is the editor-in-chief of the Creation Research Society Quarterly. So he's publishing his own work in a journal that he's the chief editor for. That's not necessarily awful, but yikes, that's concerning. I can't stop looking at this paper. What are these graphics? Why are they so low res? Like this wouldn't fly in an essay for a bachelor's degree, much less a scientific publication. It looks like his whole argument here is that because the mutations that he's observing are like just shutting genes off rather than building new ones, that it's not real evolution, and that it doesn't tell us where the genes come from, and so we can't say that evolution's real. This makes no sense. Like, even if you wanted to split hairs here and say that it's microevolution, not macroevolution, it's still a change in allele frequencies in a population across generations. This is still talking about evolution. So I'm going to do 2 things. Since Dr. Anderson clearly isn't familiar with the concept of peer review, first of all, I'm going to put the link to this paper in the description for this video, so you can go and read it and let me know what you think in the comments. And then number 2, I'm going to send this to a few friends who are familiar with peer review and see what they have to say. I'm actually recording this before I do that, so we'll see how that goes, I guess. If it works and it goes well, you'll know about it right now.
Hey, Pete! Hey, Forrest, how you doing? My name is Peter White. I'm an associate professor of evolution education and entomology at Michigan State University.
Hey, what's going on, Sam? Hey, Forrest. I'm doing great. Good to see you. Yeah, so I got my undergrad in wildlife biology from the University of Montana, and then I went on to the University of Maryland for my master's and PhD, where I got to spend 4 years in Australia studying satin bowerbirds. From there, I then took a postdoctoral fellowship at Texas A&M University, and then moved back up here to Washington State. Hey there, Lena!
Hey, Forrest. I'm Lena. I'm a 5th-year PhD candidate at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I'm getting my PhD in astrobiology, and I'm also a NASA graduate fellow.
Hey there, Cole! Hello, my name is Cole Creighton. I am better known on TikTok as Cole Creighton, and now I work as director of research for a cannabis company in Michigan called Grasshopper Farms. Hey, Ben!
Hey, Forrest, what's going on? My name is Dr. Ben Ryan. I'm a scientist at the university. I'm also a science communicator on TikTok and other platforms.
What's up, Isaac?
Hey, Forrest, good to see you. I teach 8th grade science in Kansas, so I have a lot of evolution today.
So I sent you Dr. Anderson's paper. What were your thoughts? I think the author makes two mistakes in the paper. For the first mistake, what he's pointing out, he's saying, look, antibiotic resistance is based on various genes and proteins being rendered non-functional through mutation. So because in this case, biological changes resulting in things breaking, it's actually not a good exemplar of evolution. The mistake he makes here is that evolution is not exclusively limited to the making of things. In fact, in his paper, the definition of evolution that he uses is descent or modification. Well, when a genetic sequence is rendered non-functional through mutation, and that's passed on to future generations of bacteria, that's precisely descent with modification. The second mistake, and this is a bit of a shorter one, he concludes that because bacteria develop antibiotic resistance by turning off genes or rendering genes non-functional, that evolution can therefore not explain where those genes came from in the first place. And when I phrase it that way, I think
I almost feel like these scientists sometimes are like Bilbo Baggins, and they see this missing scale on the dragon's snout, right? And they think if they put an arrow in that scale, that just the whole dragon dies. This paper just focuses on origin. If you can't identify the specific origin of a genetic mechanism that is, say, lost function or allowed a bacterium to resist a particular antibiotic, that brings the whole dragon down. And that's just not, the wonderful thing about science is that's not how science works. That's just one piece of the puzzle. And it doesn't mean you don't still have an almost complete puzzle. And then on top of that, this entire argument that we need to know the origin of every single genetic mechanism to then make some claim that precludes the operation of evolution as we talk about it it's kind of ludicrous. It's just not a solid argument.
It's trying to do something pretty ambitious, which is to cast out or overthrow a very well accepted framework to explain a lot of natural phenomena in the biological realm. And it's not presenting any new data necessarily, but it's trying to reframe data and suggest that there is a better way to explain this framework to the evolutionary theory. And that is, those are pretty big claims. And so what I'd be looking for if this came across my desk as a reviewer is, well, does this new framework explain the existing data better than the current one? Does it present any new evidence, or does it show that the evidence fits better with the tenets or the assumptions that other framework has? And then I'd also be looking for how well represented the current framework is. So I think that this paper fails to do both of those things, because the strategy that it seems to use is to misrepresent and mischaracterize the existing framework, and also simultaneously does not provide any new evidence that supports the alternative framework. So I think those are my general thoughts. As a result of that, probably rejecting it based on those facts.
One of the things that was very odd from my perspective was that the paper seemed to rely a lot on logical fallacies to arrive at the conclusion, including in many of the examples that the author themselves authored. So they kept using this line. They would say, however, a mutation that causes a loss of regulatory control does not offer a genetic mechanism that can account for the origin of this regulatory control, which is very odd. A, that's not actually a requirement for the thing be able to explain both how it got there and how it went away. But more importantly, in the example that they use in that line, where they talk about this regulatory protein called MAR-R that inhibits the production of the efflux pumps MAR-A and MAR-B, after 5 minutes of Googling, I was able to find another article online that shows that a decrease in MAR-R, the regulatory protein, actually causes a net loss in the genetic spreading of any given bacteria. There were birth defects, there were a variety of other problems. With regards to ampicillin resistance or some kind of antibiotic resistance, in a condition, an environmental condition, in which that is necessary to procreate, it will obviously, natural selection, will select for the genes that allow something to procreate in an environment with antibiotics. That doesn't mean that whatever regulatory control or cell functions are getting shut off aren't beneficial outside of the extreme scenario of growing in an antibiotic. And the really sad thing to me is that there is a valid and interesting argument to be had regarding the importance that we place upon horizontal gene transfer with regards to how that affects our understanding of kind of neo-Darwinian evolution, right? This is an interesting question, and we should look at how there's been a lot of evidence that horizontal gene transfer is really important with regards to the genetic diversity that we see in the prokaryotic domains of bacteria and archaea. But the approach having this versus creation is just a very odd thing. Overall,
described on the website and quote emphasizing the of existing scientific data with creationist framework. And just let that go. And then I just was pissed off the whole rest of it. So, but basically my end result was pissed off. It felt like he was trying to find a way to finish his sentence, but he like couldn't really figure it out. Well, I think I did it out right I want to get back and I want to revise it, speak about it later. But he just like kept going back to that. He makes the assumption early on that any change in genotype will alter cellular function in a negative way. And I thought that was his arguments when he starts breaking down the antibiotic resistance pathways and stuff. He says this does not provide an explanation for the original molecule binding to the antibiotic. And this was just puzzling for me. I didn't understand why the mechanism through which bacteria evade our antibiotic the bacteria's original antibiotic. I just don't understand that as an argument. And that was like the whole argument. That was the whole thing. So I just feel like I thought that these arguments were whether or not bacterial antibiotic resistance in vitro should be considered like the model of evolution because of like there's a lot of evolution. And I felt like he was like kind of in there, and I was like, okay, I see a little bit of his argument, but then he just like put it back up. This is why I think this. Like, okay, no, that's not the case. You know, and I quote from the paper that I just he says that if the house, if you take out an interior wall of a house, that's like the equivalent thing. And he says, quote, while this larger dining room may be desirable, the mechanism of removing this wall cannot legitimately be offered as an example of how this interior wall would be built. And I just thought, first off, I understand taking out the wall, you're going to get to see everything and how it works. But also, like, why? I just didn't understand that. Like, if that whole debate is about understanding of biology. But yeah, it's just shocking and overall.
Right away, the first word was evolutionist, and I knew from there this was going to happen. It's literally from just within the first little bit of the paper, he starts talking about how bacteria become resistant by from plasmid via horizontal gene transfer, and that got my attention. This may and the author even admits that. He talks about what the definition of evolution is. He mentions that a big change in gene over time. But unfortunately, by the seventh page of the study, higher strong, he's no longer arguing against evolutionary change over time. He is now admitting that he is going to change the definitions in his paper, and he is going to argue against descent with modification. Basically, arguing that antibacterial resistance isn't evidence worth proving like common ancestry. Evolution is in the bigger picture. It's even right here highlighted. Therefore, these genetic changes offer no example of a genetic mechanism for the evolutionary acquisition of flight by non-flying organisms, cognition by non-cognitive organisms, photosynthesis by non-photosynthesizing organisms, etc. And like, yeah, I agree. I'm an 8th grade middle school science teacher, and I would never tell my students that antibacterial resistance is evidence of any of that. It's not. But it is evidence of evolutionary change, which is what you set out to answer.
Well, thank you so much for your thoughts. And before I let you go, do you have anything going on you want people to know about?
Yeah, well, one of the more recent things I've been working on is something called the Connected Bio Project. You can go to connectedbio.org, and we've put together a set of interactive online lessons. I've worked with a group called the Concord Consortium. It's for high schoolers where they can learn about the process of evolution. Here they're looking at mouse fur color in a species called Peromyscus polynotus. They can look at the genetic sequences. They can look at how new proteins are formed, how pigment is formed in these mice, and then how, at an organismal level, natural selection actually acts on these mice with different fur colors, and how allele frequencies can then change over time in populations. So it's really looking at evolution from nucleotides all the way through to populations. So that's connectedbio.org. Feel free to check it out if you have a chance.
So I feel like I've got a couple exciting things that I'm working on right now. Chuck Darwin on TikTok, so just at Chuck Darwin on TikTok. It's a lot of science content. You'll see a little, like, maybe some peppering of a little social justice and some funny stuff, but it's largely science, and my love of science and nature just live there. You can also find some of the things that I create. So I love the, Sasquatch. I love working with vinyl and fabrics and stuff. It satisfies my creative side. So if you're on Instagram, you can find my stuff at Chuck Darwin Designs. That's all one word, at Chuck Darwin Designs. And I also have an Etsy shop, Chuck Darwin Designs. So check it out. Thanks very much.
Yeah, so check out my TikTok channel, which is where I post most of my science communication content. My handle is at CharmQuarks with a Z at the end. And then I've also recently started creating new content for my Instagram specifically, which is the same handle, at CharmQuarks.
Anyone that would like to find my content on the internet, you can find me on pretty much all social media under the name Cole the Science Dude. Remember, that's Cole the Science Dude, not Cole the Science Guy, and I look forward to seeing you around.
Check out my social medias, I suppose. TikTok at Dr. Brain, Instagram at Dr. Brain, Twitter at Dr. Brain. If you want to check out my research papers, feel free to check out my Google Scholar. My name is Ben Ryan, actually. R-E-I-N.
So I'd say go check out my TikTok account if you want to learn more about evolution, especially human evolution. I'm really interested in the ancient human species, so I love talking about that. My Twitter's at iRussell21, and I would highly recommend watching this experiment. You can watch it on YouTube. We'll put the link in here, but you can watch as bacteria evolves over time, and you can see the evolutionary change. And this is one of those that is not just gene flow. This includes mutation. So it seems to kind of debunk this study as a whole. I don't know if I should have said study, but at that point, whatever.
You see that, Kevin? That's peer review. If you had done that before you published this paper, would have saved you a lot of embarrassment.
Beneficial mutations. We define a beneficial mutation as a mutation that provides a benefit to the organism. In other words, I'm now resistant to the antibiotic, which is beneficial if that antibiotic's around. Okay? As a human, I like to drink milk. Okay? I have a mutation in me that allows me to drink milk. It's a mutation.
Oh, is that right?
To me, it's beneficial, but it's still a mutation.
It's also a great example of evolution. Lactose tolerance is caused by one single point mutation, one single nucleotide that changes and is so beneficial that it spread throughout a massive population of people. Good example.
If you look just at beneficial mutations, which is what evolutionists love to look at, beneficial, 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 and I say, but that's really irrelevant. What's happening at the genetic level? That's the key. It's not whether it's beneficial or not beneficial, it's what's happening genetically.
But the beneficial mutations are genetic.
You've met Garank.
Saying that the mutations aren't important, it's what's happening at the genetic level. It's like saying being blonde or brunette doesn't matter, it's your hair color that we're looking for. It's like saying epinephrine isn't important, it's the adrenaline. They're the same thing, dude.
Repeatedly, what the evolutionist community does is they offer example after example after example of what they claim, here's how evolution works.
When grace is solid,
yes, it is.
It rocks.
Because what you're doing is you're taking pre-existing systems and knocking them out or reducing them. You're not explaining how they evolved to begin with.
Because that's not what those papers that you just showed were talking about. Evolution can be reductive or it can be additive. Either way, a change in allele frequencies in a population over the course of multiple generations is evolution. There's nothing in the definition that says that it can never lose anything, or that it always has to gain, or that you have to know where it came from, otherwise you don't know anything. Like, all you're doing here is saying, I don't know how this works, therefore it must be magic. If I don't know where my car was manufactured, that doesn't mean that I don't know how the engine works, or that it isn't a car.
It's the analogy of if you have a house, and in your house you have the dining room and a wall, and then your recreation room. And your wife, being, you know, the big socialite that she is, she wants a bigger dining room to entertain her parties. Well, you have a choice. I can keep my rec room, or I can knock at that wall and get a bigger dining room. Well, you know, everybody knows happy wife is a happy home.
Not strike anybody else as sexist.
So you knock out the inner wall, and they have a bigger dining room. And it's beneficial because she's happy. But don't tell a carpenter that how you built the house was by knocking out a wall. But that's what evolutionists do repeatedly, is they give you an illustration of knocking out a wall, and this is how the house was built.
This dude seriously has one argument. Like, this is the exact same nonsense from the paper. Kevin, nobody's saying that knocking down a wall is how you build a house. What we are saying is that the processes by which you can knock down a wall are also some of the processes by which you can build a house. And either way, knocking down the wall is an adaptive change. It would be evolution if that floor plan was now so much better that all the new houses on the block started being built with a bigger dining room without this wall. You're mixing up acclimatization, adaptation, and evolution. It's a freshman mistake. Your analogy's bad and you should feel bad.
Now, Kevin, a lot of your research was done in the area of studying bacteria.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Correct, yes. Particularly mutations in bacteria.
Yeah.
Let me give an example. To become resistant to certain types of antibiotics, with humans, if
you're a scientist. I once had a genetics professor in college. He was a PhD geneticist who didn't know what a Hox gene was when I asked him. Who didn't know.
Picture this. You are playing a marksman as a mid laner with Smite, but your farm is on par with a drunk faker and you are 4 to 5 levels higher than most people in the game, which means every interaction you have with an enemy player looks something like this until you end the game with a damaged wiener that compared to the other guys, as women saying.
Fox is that?
All because Riot failed to account for something like this happening. You see, the company recently must have teamed up with Geico in an effort to make jungling so easy a caveman can do it by coming up with this totally original idea that Pokemon definitely never had, to adopt and train little critters that evolve over time until a fully stacked one gives you crazy bonuses, and thus the thought of multiple people on one team having an evolved Pokemon seems almost unfair. So Riot made it so if you want to have a little Bulbasaur of your own follow you around while laning, great, but you won't get any gold for minions so that everyone doesn't adopt one. But that's only up until 15 minutes. So my good friend Wholesome Gwen, who you may remember from my climbing series, showed me this strat that players in his Grandmaster games are running, and I will explain the idea using one of his games. You can queue any lane, but mid seems to be the crops cream, and early laning phase is typically pretty much the same, except you have Smite, so you can make sure the hoodlums in the wheelchairs never get missed. If you are a good player, you may even defy the rules of rock paper scissors by somehow beating a rock as scissors in a 1v1, but that's certainly not required. When it's getting close to 15 minutes, you start pinging your jungler stacks and communicating your intentions, because you will be visiting Professor Oak for your own starter Pokemon soon. At this point, your jungler has his items stacked and can focus on ganking or getting full gold from your lane, while you can power farm because you have levels and items to clear camps super fast. As a mid, you will also be ahead of the enemy junglers, so you can start stealing their camps and using your advantage in the forest to get fed. You start getting gold and XP exponentially faster than everyone in the game until you transform your item within 10 minutes of getting it. This gives you 2 fully charged smites on your team for objectives and all the benefits that come from stacking your own to the point where you can 1v9 games, and today I'm going to show that even if my pace is too low, this is embarrassingly overpowered, which goes to show you can learn a lot from seeing what high elo players like Wholesome Gwen are doing, which is why I use FaceCheck for the latest trends. FaceCheck is this handy dandy app that fits right next to the pile of buggy code Riot calls a client, and I use it religiously. For example, I'm trying to book a direct flight to hell for myself, so I picked up Thane Top, and the app tells me things like who I should be banning as well as the most successful builds and runes, which can be imported directly into the client just by pushing one button. I love being a peeping Tom on the pro. My fancy knowing that this tab can show me what all the super high reload players are building, which in this case ended up swaying me into taking Ghost. The know-it-alls are probably typing comments about how League is removing scouting tools in Champ Select to prevent nonsense like this, but once you are loaded into the match, their data is still fully allowed, and FaceCheck does the in-game report the best. As you can see, everyone on the other team is a novice on their champ, which means I can have confidence in my own coworkers to stomp by my side as I'm having repetitive slap battles with Tentacle Tina until the game ends, and FaceCheck's post-game report tells me the areas I did well, but also what I should look to improve so that I can focus on my own gameplay instead of f***ing up and blaming others when I can't climb. So if this all sounds nice to you, check the link in the description to download it for free today. Alright, so I chose to play the Little Wicked Witch of the West because even without an ignite, as long as I can dodge the Sleepy Squid shitter, I can do the Papa Pumpkin take one more jump in combo for a solo bolo in lane. Then anyone in my piss pit elo knows that if I start taking my jungler's camps at any point, she will either AFK or start airdropping me pictures of a severed cow dick while running it down and telling me to drink bleach, so I try to communicate my 5-year plan early, and then I continue playing lane like it's just a normal Wednesday. Which in this case is acting like the G Fuel is hitting the bladder and I need to sneak out for a quick piss in the shrubs while actually putting down a creeper camera so that I can tell when baby Rapunzel comes skipping back to lane so that I can request a Xanax and dream about her getting blown to little Barbie bits in my sleep. Then I decide to help up north because Galaxy Pluto's asshole Malphite is getting bullied by that Elon Musk Frankenstein baby, and I know after a long day of work he will want a beer rather than a bunny with a bomb fetish, so easy pickings for me. Turns out the enemy jungler is both a Kaisa and a total dumb shit, so when we get word that she's filling out the adoption paperwork for the 700-pound water cockroach we had our eyes on, it was like all hands on deck as I cut off the escape with a little parkour and Papa Pumpkin Mom on a rampage now combo. So I jumped the gun on the whole buy an egg at 15 minutes thing, and I didn't want to tax my own jungler, so I'm in the unfriendly forest trying to suck off a red buff, which does indeed succeed, and then when the owner of said red buff comes and I illustrate why having solo lane XP at this point in the game makes this so stupid strong. Then I slapped around the reverse mitosising rocks, which set me up for a gank angle so unique I was being contacted by the Rift Kama Sutra for a cameo as I entered and introduced myself to the bubble-wrapped bride before front flipping my young rabbit balls onto her head, waiting for the moment to flash her bitch bind, which splattered her dead guts onto the number mumbler and ultimately set up the double as my friends took down swollen Elon. I figure I might as well finish off the Kaisa's camps with this chicken coup, only to run into the moron myself as she behaves like I do when I'm about to run into someone I kinda know in public and want to avoid the awkward conversation by acting like I didn't see them, but it doesn't work out for her quite as well. Then straight to my camps while acting in chat like my decision to rock smite was just an oopsie floopsie and not a calculated plan to absolutely invert every enemy asshole on the Rift. Also shout out to this Shiv, you'd think I knew her or it was a duo with how accommodating she was to this shenanigans as she told me her egg is done and so I could crack mine over her skillets moving forward, but the old grumpy grandpa wasn't exactly a fan of these innovative strats as he is a follow the meta take a shit before you shower only kind of guy, but he just had to wait and see the beauty that comes from this. But even without your jungler's support, which any League player knows you should definitely not count on, having such a level advantage from being mid, especially if you tap a few tits early, makes you waltz around in their forest like you own the place and they just pay rent. As you can see, within a few minutes of buying the egg I'm already half stacked and ready to benefit from the first round of evolution perks. This incidentally puts me in a prime position to insert it into the back when I see the bad guys off in River talking about how they remember when you could get a Chipotle burrito for under $7. Good times as I see the Triangle of Terror launch, and I know just the thing that zoomed out 4-whore could use. Surprise, it's a murder and he's probably not happy, but he's also dead, so who gives a shit. I then get in my Halloween costume as the killer caboose, but I'm very calculated in my decisions, so let's just say Thomas the Tank Engine real quiet right about now as I chase the shrunken sleep doctor only to get cucked by my ult cancelling itself. But nothing like a bride bashing to cheer me up, plus a hop into homicide on the evasive Girl Scout immediately followed. But we had a Bulbasaur to evolve, so immediately back to business. As you can see, the clear speed at this point in the game makes things like chickens into dogs into frogs an easy breezy beautiful cover girl walk in the park on the way to overpowered status. Then I give my mid lane midgets a quick pep talk and say daddy's gotta do something unholy, so you little fuck babies push like hell while he's gone, and then I head into the danger because you can steal a buff right out from under their jungler, which I don't show correctly here as I remove her and cut the scene before showing what happens when you walk straight into CC right after. And one thing that I realized when doing this was the crazy amount of both XP and gold that is just constantly getting funneled into my asshole while buzzing through these camps. Every time I looked down I had thousands more in the bank, like I invested in Bitcoin back in 2015, which I realize now isn't the best time to make that comparison, but hey, at least I'm not trying to split push mid with no vision as a Kaisa jungle 3 levels down from the rest of the world. Am I right, backseaters? Am I freaking right? Side note, shit did get a little real when I was trying to Michael Vick the neighbor's dogs. As you can see, that toddler slipped a few Ambien up into my ass crack when I wasn't looking, and a very unsafe nap ensued, which put me in a predicament where I had to whip out the bucket list and cross off the whole plant of pumpkin on a plasma patty wide hip bitched head so that from the grave I can cash out on one more kill. We are now all crowding around what looks to be a wild Charizard spawning in the river womb, but I'm not the real jungler, so I'm thinking screw this objective nonsense. I'm close to my damn Venusaur, but our jungler is like who has 2 thumbs and sexually identifies as a dragon, and I think she tried to say this guy but was too exhausted, so Galaxy Gooch takes over by making them all jump, and my introvert ass is like, God fine, I guess I will come as long as I can just fire one auto and get paid for my appearance, to which everyone agrees. Update on the evolution: at 26 minutes I killed the last camp as a mid laner with smite, which prompted one of these. Which meant I had a companion for my kill crazes, plus I was 3 years older than everyone else on the rift, so I felt like LeBron James dunking on little high schoolers with how obnoxiously free the result of this strat makes things. And fed or not, Here I Come isn't typically a game I would play with no vision as an ADC, but the massive shield my evolved jungle item provides means I can deep throat a bitch, bind, take a tranquilizer to the tits, wait patiently for the color on my screen to AFK, and yet still make it out alive so that I could one day tell the story to my grandkids of how I then paced around and watched a 6,000-year-old toddler get butt blasted by a dragon lady and an old ass man. We received an email from the big blue boss saying that work from home was ending because COVID is just a cute memory, but I'm not a fan of wearing dress pants or leaving my house, so I opt into having a word with the boss myself, which full disclosure turned hostile, and now I don't have a boss to report to anymore. But I now have both Bloodthirster and the Green Bean Jungle item, which according to math means I have a regenerating 700 HP shield as an ADC, which also means that the little toddler torpedoes merely tickle me while 2 right clicks has her shitting bricks back in base. Then side note, if you murder your boss because he wants you to return to the office, it won't actually solve your problem, so I don't recommend you try it. The company will just hire another one just like him who is just as demanding, and I'm not sure if murdering the new one will let you stay in your 9 to 5 PJs, but I'll let you know when I know. At this point I'm so fed. Donald Trump is basically talking about how corrupt I am during campaign speeches, which means when baby Barbie dolls poke the bear they learn what Storm Razor procs feel like before angry amputees make sure they sit still while I ask them where all their health went. This opens the door for us to attempt what looks like only a team of intoxicated inting idiots would think is a good idea, but I guess Towers will be on Twitter later bitching about needing a buff because I couldn't even tell one was a part of that fight. As we make all the enemies disappear, I meet my new boss, who also didn't understand that I'm not going back to the fucking office, and with that I just want to say try this shit before Riot finds a way to nerf it, because even for a dog water drinking player like myself it felt pretty cheddar cheesy. Check out one of these videos, they all got shit views, but I thought they were some of my better recent scripts. Rav out.
Alright everybody.
Picture this. You are playing a marksman as a mid laner, with smite, but your farm is on par with a drunk faker and you are 4 to 5 levels higher than most. Attention gamers, 10 years ago, I installed League of Legends, and considering the player base at the time wasn't full of genetically modified 14-year-olds who wrap electrodes around their underdeveloped testicles to increase their reflexes while simultaneously harvesting their piss and sweat into their Ninja-branded sippy cups to keep them hydrated during 14-hour grind fests, I hit gold almost immediately. Little did I know that the rest of the world would include things like last hitting and reading their mini-map. I would just develop a severe case of separation anxiety from my wards and an inability to convince myself that my teammates are to blame for my seemingly permanent residence in Elo hell. And aside from a few 100,000 people joining me in my struggles as your average Hearthstone Toxic League of Legends player, Season 10 has been no different. We have faced the forces of solo queue, the people who leave games that are winnable, the whiners with microscopic fork swords flaming my builds and my picks only for me to swoop in and save the day like the dad they wish never left them. We have dealt with the auto-filled supports, the Yumis, the ones afflicted with severe cases of Yasuo syndrome. But today we escaped. All the pain, all the anger, made worth it when after 600 ranked games, I was finally carried out of the piss-pit prison that I deserved to be enslaved in for an eternity. So in today's video, you will get the dramatic 5-game promo series that led to this historic event. Now if you are new here and think you can relate to my heart-stuck struggles masked by a sense of toxic positivity and cringy jokes, please consider subscribing, and the rest of you are now permitted to get out of that like button and let's get into it. Okay, so game 1 I resorted to playing my pocket thickness bubblegum being pretty and dressing like a celebrity enough to get my absolutely nothing else of value to the table as this is 2020 and that seems to be a good recipe. But unfortunately my nipples bleed through my pop star brassic wasn't enough to convince 5 of them to not take dumbass's ass flavor. Dark Harvest my first promos game. But I got a glimpse of hope when their bald, pervy Secret Service man proved to be board certified in 9 forms of stupidity, going out of his way to request we do an icebreaker only to burn his flash, encouraging me to do the same, which scored me a quick 300. And then I make a non-convincing argument to the promo gods to let me pass this interview by casually overextending with 2 wards and less vision than a coal miner with cataracts as Obama's wife asks the frost fetish hoe to sit still so I can splatter some dead midget guts onto her for some burst, but big surprise the blind bats are getting ganked, and instead of retreating to safety I resort to doing everything in my power to be convinced that I am not lying to myself when I type worth in all chat 10 seconds later when we both die after greeting for 1 kill. And to make matters worse, Mr. Teen Titan and his glow-in-the-dark dildo immediately came back for a lame gank just to violently pull any confidence that I have about deserving to be inflat straight out of my raw penis so he can take a sloppy donkey shit all over. But my inability to was no longer my biggest problem as we had a boulder brain top laner getting his rock cock smashed in on repeat and threatening to leave the game. And it turns out Luke is both Mexican and a man of his word because that shitter scrammed 2 minutes later fulfilling prophecy that Riot's algorithms match you with the kids still on mommy's tit milk the second you get into promos. And of course quitting is contagious, so my teammates would rather type about how they just agree that being a pussy and complaining about it is better than trying. So they are chilling in Fountain, leaving me all alone in lane to get tower dipped just so the lazy bitch can tap her ult to steal the credit from me and the tower's hard work without any intention of spending the gold as my jungler stands rolling mall cop hands straight up that lonely ash hole for the kill. And then like clockwork right exactly at the 15-minute mark the Marcus Moron reconnects as if he set a timer to the exact second so that he can be the most punctual of pussies to check off the uncertified piece of shit box on his voter's ballot, but I don't respond well to stains like that and I am not keen on getting up so early in my promo, so I vote no, which sparks the response that you can probably expect out of my other teammates, which is to follow the leader to douchebag drive Pink Floyd alone in a legitimate 2v5 for my first game, and so when the toxic timer rings 3 minutes later and Malphite reconnects to issue the next vote, I appropriately concede as I know how stupid it makes you look to not do so when the outcome is obvious and you have lost anything. So yay, we confirmed Riot's matchmaking algorithm is working as intended and you are a liar if you say that's never happened to you. We brushed it off and queued up for game 2. And this one got off to a much better start considering we were up against Gothic Titan guns who I have never seen in this piss low rank, not practically wearing a waitress outfit, working hard to feed everyone on the rip. So naturally he votes early and then glow in the dark Obama's wife goes cosmic bowling to strike out the emo and I fire a thin beam to assist the Demogorgon in nabbing some early cash. Then my jungler calls me and tells me he swears he saw some bitch turn into a cat right in front of him, and so I roll my eyes and say I will be up in a second, thinking the Harry Potter movie is just unhealthy at this point, but sure enough it's included bipolar tabby who asked me claw or spear and I answer by asking thin beam or right flick. She chose the latter. And to be honest, bot lane was a total snooze fest, resulting in roaming Rav poking his head out of the dick pocket in my undies saying give me attention, so I ran mid once again just to see some dressed up sardine and his fat uncle Bruce casually 2v1ing. and I get there just in time to ask Puss in Boots to sit still so Fizz can splash and dash her caught out ass. So at this point I realize I have a fed Fizz and a jungler who have this game under control, so my strategy is to just hop in one of their backpacks and say we, as being overly passive in lane and not feeding will win us this game, but my support would rather overhand rubber band around the water for no reason with no vision before flaming me for not joining her in dumbassville. So I explain my pussy approach to a win condition, and since she is a League of Legends player, her response is to show off her certification and being me by leaving. So joy to the fucking world I guess for my support being a toxic hitmaker, but at least I have the bruised dragon ready to step in if things get too crazy down here. And when Cat Nips goes to check on the sound she heard coming from the bushes, he gets himself ready to say peekaboo you a dead bitch, only to find himself in the middle of their whole posse. So I zoom out trying to salvage the situation, but due to both my support and my accuracy on my fourth shot being totally MIA, we only get a 1-for-1 out of the ordeal. But I tricked this griefer with the big gun into helping me by picking a fight outside of the lane she left me in as we chased this undead bubble-wrapped bridezilla through the forest, only for Billy Joe Armstrong to pull his pants down and hardcore moon us, effectively blue balling me and Amazon Prime ordering us one uncoordinated shitfest as Senna gets rooted once but decides that it would go better if she was also under tower, as if her presence in bot lane is intentionally trying to sabotage me. But at least there is one thing we can agree on, and that's no bondage tonight, so I murder the bride. Then Mr. Winged and carry Rav to Plaid is in the area, so I go bird's eye view and launch a long boy at nothing just so I can say I was there during the second kill. We get tier 1 tower out of that, so it's time for me to wander aimlessly around the rift missing free XP and farm in lieu of being able to post a comment that says first in teamfights, typically followed by a comment that says first in, being sent back to my own fountain. But my jungler decided to bring someone that he met at anger management class this morning to work today, and the thing is just elated at the opportunity to nose tackle a statue, which opens up the doors for us to play an entire game of Warhammer 40k on top of distinguished gentleman Tom Kench. Mundo salivates his way back to fountain, and I launch the long boy simulation to assist in one homicide before using my last 2 shots as zoning mechanisms to scare the rest off. This is enough to squash the hopes of these shitters, bringing this to a tie ball game as I queued up for a third. And this one started with my support Mr. Peacock Coat Patrick declining like 72 easy as piss opportunities to engage just so that he could really surprise the world by going in at the one time where it wasn't a good idea, resulting in him flat out donating a lump sum of gold to the bad guys, and then ultimately me getting my soul pixie sucked straight out of my ass under tower. And this pattern of ill-advised engages continues, but do not fear that Thanos Hands cosplayer was here as Set uses his 200 years button to survive, and the mall cop dashes in as I globber Gosu down. Then we collectively inform their support that this is not Sparta before executing a quick gangbang in the bushes. Chippendale Charlie gets a work call to apparently strip butt-ass naked and let 3 of them take turns screwing him in Dragon Pit, but thanks to a magical muff teleportation, a banana the size of a small car, and a shift shooter over the wall, we are able to punish the perverts for their actions. Then a few moments later we bring Charlie back to the spot of the crime so he can confront the trauma and kill off some of the wards that were sparking bad memories when BAM Project Hey Banger brings out his entire Beyblade collection, so I bust out of there like a forced fart and then long range supply the troops with some prismatic potassium before taking a seemingly eternity to join back together with my friends for one final ring popper. This allows us to get tower, but in the final seconds the sky informs us that it's going to shit out a Spartan, to which man Tights martyrs himself by giving Gerard Butler some aerial fellatio, and despite me not exactly thinking it was necessary, it certainly wasn't his worst moment this game. We've launched a prank war against their team, and our next idea is to murder their dogs, but the great Magenta Mace man gets an offer to take their mid laner into the closet, and I just stare at the dots wondering which one is taking it up the ass, but apparently Abraham Lincoln was refusing to pay for the services he received in there, so we unfortunately had to murder him. And then right when he gets back from his gray screen timeout, the mall cop makes sure he is available and ready to deep throat a gigantic plantain. But something starts to feel off when my teammates all group up like pigs by a pan of shit, and sure enough the opportunistic hey slut makes them pay for not social distancing, as they all get sent back to Boris to look at all the items they can't afford to buy because they were being total dumb shits. And despite us all getting to fulfill our childhood fantasy of gang banging a swollen Barney, things were not looking good. Add one scene where my teammates literally waited for my back to complete right in front of them as their cue to pick a fight, as if they didn't want me around to judge their embarrassingly bad performance or something, and this one just spiraled out of control with no one in particular to blame, except maybe my dumbass Set support who went 1 in 10, but I remained tiltless and immediately went next. And this one got off to a decent start as my team had 3 uncontested homicides and I was farming at about a silver E low level, so nothing out of the ordinary, but our creepy Karen and her midget sperm spawns get caught in the act of the great red buff heist, so I rotate better than all Yasuo mains' wives do with their excuses of why they can't have sex that night, and I arrive just in time to deprive that Demogorgon his isolated cum shot as I sky glitter shitter him, allowing Arachne Amy to nab the kill. Then we come back bot and that floating kitten shit has the audacity to roam around the rift without being latched onto the tit of her master, so Panth curb stomps her dumb face and I make her wish she had some more of those bullshit zoomies as we euthanize her with ease. Then a minute later and they think strobe lighting me until I seize will prevent me from giving them a proper bubblegum bath, as my support contributes by making himself available to give them free gold, and we trade a 1-for-1 before I back off, opting to not be the butt of any jokes about me losing to a Yumi. But then I noticed we had Mr. 200 years spin to fucking win in base alone already before the 20-minute mark, and that's when I realized this one was probably going in the win column, but I still wanted to show this Lucian why my mom always called me the masturbator in the house by saying psych this is Charlotte and her web hurts before firing a totally necessary ult over his dead body. Then all that was left to do was conform to the group homicides and promise to plead the fifth if any detectives asked where I was the night Darius single-handedly murdered an entire pathetic little family in their own house, and voila, we were 2-2 with everything riding on this final game. And so game 5 my confidence was flaky, my arms were shaky, and I had to get straight naked because the amount of nervous gooch sweat that was accumulating was becoming a distraction, but the game turns out to lack the suspense that leaves you feeling like you have to keep a constant clench rolling or a little brownie will slip out of your oven if you are picking up what I am putting down, because Heisman, the 69 trillion mastery point blind kickboxer main, decided the stakes were high enough for him to whip out the bandana, and basically the entire game for me looked and sounded like Rift Alexa had the hots for this man, as she just wouldn't stop talking about him and how smooth his repetitive acts of egregious murder were. And so after a light workout for him and a seemingly non-existent amount of contribution from me, this one ended in a unanimous quorum of quitters. And so after 600 ranked games in Season 10, I had escaped the depths of Goldie low hell. And for those of you like 9 malding mouth breathers just butt chugging through an extremely hateful comment right now about how I got carried here, all I have to say to you is, bitch, you guessed it. Now if you want the full experience of my climb to plat, including Heisman's perspective in some of these games with our real comms during the game, as well as an update on how I am faring in Platinum Elo, check out our second channel for daily uploads of our ranked climb. If you enjoyed this video,
what is up, boys? What is up, boys and girls? Welcome back to another Aoki and Highs video. Today we are playing the Snare Sisters.
Alright guys, this could potentially be our first video on the duo channel, Raven Highs. We're playing our iconic Lux Morgana permanent snare comp. Bot lane, we're up against MF and Senna. And looks like people are...
Okay, so preseason is well and truly upon us. I thought I'd maybe take a little bit of a break out of our regularly scheduled programming of nonsense to maybe help you out with some